Okay. Well, here we are, 16 years after that dreadful day. 2011 is a day a lot like today, just beautiful outside. And then the planes hit the Twin Towers. The question for criminologists is, what have we learned since then? How many of you taken terrorism classes here? Okay, I hope you've learned something. One of the things I've learned is that one of the places to look for the radicalization of people who become terrorists is the prison. So much of my work has been looking at this issue of radicalization in the prison. And there is the definition of radicalization. It's when the people enter into a process that leads to beliefs that justify violence for political or religious reasons. Now the key word here is process. What social processes does one go through to develop these beliefs? You don't come out of your mother's womb a terrorist, right? This happens over time. So it has to be developed. So I've been looking at what are these processes that people go through to adopt these beliefs. All of this is in the book I published called The Spectacular Few on radicalization in prison. I chose this title very carefully to show that there's a lot of people out there with extreme beliefs. You know, you don't have to believe the fact that every radicalized prisoner is a terrorist. Gandhi was radical. He was in prison. John the Baptist was in prison for some radical beliefs. Martin Luther King, Mandela, and Hitler. Right? So it's a double-edged sword, this business of radicalized beliefs in prison. But who turns those beliefs into terrorist action? That's the question I'm concerned with. So here are some trends in prisoner radicalization, or these are issues that have people in Washington very concerned. You know, Jesus, are our prisons turning into incubators of radicalization that can lead to terrorism? If that's so, that's a fairly frightening thought. So here are some of the major bullet points, if you will, for this problem. I won't read them all because I can't read out of the back of my head. There's usually a thing I can read from here. But the major point here is that about 80% of the religious conversions in American prisons are to Islam. Christianity is no longer as important to prisoners as it once was. That Islam has taken its place in many quarters, many areas. So that raises the question, why did that happen? How long has that been going on? We've had conversions. What number I've got here, 420,000 since 9/11 have converted to Islam. If every one of them had become a terrorist, we'd have a lot of terrorists running around. We'd have a lot more terrorist attacks than we have. We've had remarkably few since that terrible day in 2001. These are the general arguments, three of them. One is that prisons are incubators of radicalism. Two, that Islam, if anything, does more good than harm. Teaches inmates how to manage themselves, deal with their drug problems, confront the issue of time, gives them reason and hope to live. The final is, this is the one I subscribe to, is that religion, Islam and white supremacy face as well, is a problem only under certain conditions of incarceration. And they are not good, right? Only in mismanaged, overcrowded correctional institutions. So these were the theories that I began with. I had a big question. My question was, how many guys were not terrorists when they went to prison and became terrorists when they got out? Simple as that. So I began to look at cases. And it took me one full year, 2010. I looked in for every source I could find to locate people who fit that criteria. And I located 51 cases. Now, 51 cases is not very many, right? That's why it is only a tiny, infinitesimal fraction, a spectacular few, who fit this criteria. So, prisons are not manufacturing terrorists like a factory manufactures refrigerators. They're doing a terrible job, right? So something else is going on, something very specific. I won't read this. Here is the ethnicity of these people who fit this criteria. Most of the cases occurred in the United States. My goal was if they attacked Western targets, right? So some of these cases originated abroad, but the targets of the violence were Western. In the U.S., Britain, France. Most were radicalized into radical forms of Islam, either Salafi jihadism, if you don't know what that is. Look it up on Yahoo. Take a course, read a book. I mean to diminish that, but we don't have a lot of time to go into that. Here's an example. Anybody who know who Ayman al-Zawahiri is? Good. Most wanted man in the world. The leader of Al-Qaeda. He took over from Osama bin Laden after bin Laden was killed. He is the leader of the international terrorist group known as Al-Qaeda. He was radicalized at the Citadel, a 10th century prison in Cairo, Egypt, where he was tortured, it wrapped in a torpedo, had his shoulders broken, head shaved, electrical wires strapped to him. He was a doctor. He went to prison a surgeon. He came out a butcher and formed Al-Qaeda. This is the guy radicalized in prison, formed Al-Qaeda. A spectacular few, but the crimes they commit are spectacular. This gives you an idea of what kind of organizations they are. In the U.S., mainly the people who are radicalized tend to be part of domestic groups, not international groups like Al-Qaeda or the IRA or ETA or other international groups. They're local, homegrown jihadists, white supremacists. Then it's different compared to other Western nations. Here's another case. I'll just give you an example of who some of these people are in this database I created of 51 cases. Donald DeFries simply walked away from Soledad prison, a job in the boiler room, and went out and created the Symbionese Liberation Army. He then kidnapped and raped Patty Hearst. People all forget that second part of it. Repeatedly raped Patty Hearst. Robbed banks, killed a school superintendent, and died with a shootout with the Los Angeles Police Department. He was a terrorist of renown, 1974. I started working in prisons in 1972 in Arizona. And one of the first guys I met was Gary Yarbrough, and engaged in one of the most spectacular armored truck robberies in American history. Almost $4 million, which he used not for whiskey or liquor or drugs, but he used to promote a white revolution. Bombed synagogues, killed a radio DJ named Alan Berg in Denver, and fomented revolution to start a white homeland up in the Northwest. And he has been called, the order has been called, the most sophisticated domestic terrorist group the FBI has ever faced. They were finally taken down in 1985. Yarbrough is still alive. He's in Colorado AdMax, serving 61 years. I knew him when he's 19 years old. Peter Langan converted to a white supremacist faith called, actually it's a death cult called the Phineas Priesthood or Christian Identity. Went on to form the Aryan Republican Army, committed 22 bank robberies. I've written an entire book tying Langdon to Timothy McVeigh. He used some of that money to support the Oklahoma City bombing. Another small, insignificant from the outside to most people, but when you begin to look at these cases, they are spectacular. Now here's a useful term for students who want to understand this. Radicalization doesn't occur laterally, like it doesn't occur like everywhere. We've never had a radicalized inmate come out of North Dakota. North Dakota, in my opinion, is no threat. We've had dozens come out of California. As a matter of fact, if you look at where they came from in California, they came out of specific cell blocks. These are called pockets of radicalization. So my advice to counterterrorism people, scholars, is to begin to try to uncover these pockets of radicalization. You know, all terrorism is like politics. It's all local. So a prison is not a radicalized prison per se, but there are certain cell blocks within that prison where these terrorists seem to formulate. This is not rocket science. They formulate in small cliques, organized around gangs, organized around esoteric religions, organized around gang issues, and it's from there that these issues of terrorism emerge. We were just talking about this guy, al-Zarqawi. He is the founder of ISIS, radicalized in a Jordanian prison. He took a bunch of thugs and drug addicts he found in the Jordanian prison, went to Iraq, started Al-Qaeda of Iraq, which eventually became ISIS. In other words, the whole problem we have with terrorism in the world today began in prison. You can trace it back to prison. Spectacular case. But look what it's emerged. Another case, 191 people died in the 2004 Madrid train bombing, organized by this guy, Jamal Hamadan the Chinaman, because there was a deep-seated, there's a lot of racism in Al-Qaeda and ISIS, called him the Chinaman. He funded the entire attack by dealing cocaine, ecstasy, and hash. He was supported by a cellmate that he met in Spanish detention while he was withdrawing from heroin. So these two guys, they created from this one specific section of a prison, they created the nucleus for the Madrid train bombing, the largest terrorist attack in Spanish history, organized at the prison level. Here's a case you probably never heard of. Shortly after, there was a follow-on attack, a threat to blow up the equivalent of the Supreme Court of Spain, organized by this guy, Mohammed Akrif, from one particular Topas prison, one particular prison in Spain. He had some 20 accomplices, all from the same cell block. It wasn't a problem all over Spain. It was one prison, one cell block, one pocket of radicalization. How many of you have flown since 9/11? How many of you taken off your shoes? How many of you says, why do I have to take off my damn shoes? Richard Reed. He was the shoe bomber. This man is the reason why you've all had to take off your shoes. He tried to light a match in his shoe above a flight from Paris to Miami. Bomb failed. But, more to our point, he came from a juvenile correctional joint in London called Feltham, Young Correctional Institute, Young Offenders Institution. It's a terrible place full of high suicide rates, turnover of wardens and guards, fights, gang problems. But I was able to find 6 other terrorists who all came out of Feltham, came out of the same place. I won't know who they are, but here they were. Martin Mubanga joined the Taliban. Mukhtar Ibrahim, which is a follow-on, he created a follow-on to the London bombing of 7/7. 7/7 was England's in 9/11. Here's a guy the original suicide bomber in Afghanistan, came out of Guantanamo. Believe me, of all the prisons we've created that creates an extremist problem, no institution beats Guantanamo. Even Barack Obama said, this prison needs to close because it's become a symbol for jihadists around the world. He tried for 8 years to close it. You'll remember it was his first executive decision. First day of office, I will close Guantanamo. He left office, it hadn't been closed. It's still open. So I've got 3-4 cases that show you that there were guys who were innocent when they went to Guantanamo, but they were, and I won't be forgiving here. They were tortured. The government used the term enhanced interrogation techniques. That's torture. They were tortured. And when they were tortured, they were released. They came out with an intent to do harm to the United States. And they did. Massoud was one of them. He had a wooden leg. Couldn't do anything. But which is why they let him go. They didn't see him as a risk until he blew himself up. Al-Shiri, same thing. Just thought he was just a little carpet salesman. Threw him in Guantanamo for 3 or 4 years. He committed no crime. But he had been radicalized by Guantanamo. And when he got out, he ran this guy, Abdul Muttalib, the underwear bomber. Right? The guy who nearly down the jet from Amsterdam to Detroit in 2009. So these are the cases. I thought I'd just run you through a few cases here, important cases. This trend has only increased since I wrote my book, or finished collecting dated 2011. It's only increased. The Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris, the attack at the Brussels airport, the attack in Molenbeek in Brussels. Here is one of the most insightful statements. It's taken an empirical view of this question, New York Times, showing that of those attacks in Paris and in Brussels in 2014, 2015, 15 of the 30 some who were incarcerated or who took part in that, 15 had been incarcerated in prison. In other words, they were criminals first, jihadists second. And by the way, there are 4 sets of brothers involved there too. So we've got criminals, ex-convicts, gang members who are involved in drugs and alcohol, not traditional Muslim religious activities. But they were unemployed, wheeling, dealing, selling, minor drug possession, theft, and those sorts of things. Ne'er-do-wells, till they went to prison. They met a charismatic leader, joined a gang, and before you know it, they were recruited into ISIS, the heavy metal eagles of death. Remember that? Remember that horrible night, all those people? Those guys who did that, blew themselves up, came out of prison. How many of you students want to go to work in prison? 1, 2. The times they are a-changing. Here's the last one, Barcelona. Remember Barcelona a few weeks ago? These are the 19 guys involved in that run-over attack. Killed 24 people. The guy in the center, on the bottom, 45 years old. He's what we call in prison the shot caller. He came out of prison. Remember, the rest of these guys are young, 17, 18 years old. The guy who committed the automobile attack was 22. Never committed a crime. The guy who organized the attack was 45 and came straight out of prison. And you know what? He had been incarcerated in a cell with a member of the Madrid train bombing. What goes around comes around. Pockets of radicalization. Okay, I'm halfway done, and we'll finish in the next 10, 15 minutes. All right. So, how did all this happen? After the Madrid train bombing, I got a phone call. There's the National Institute of Justice saying, would you like to study the radicalization of prisoners in America? I says, yes, of course. I says, fine, here's some money, go at it. So there was me and 2.3 million prisoners. That's how many we've got in America. I had no help, just my own wits, but I was very happy to do this. It was very interesting work. And so for 2-3 years, that's all I did. Traveled to prisons, U.S., abroad, Israel, France. I didn't go to France. Went to Romania, England about a dozen times, the Netherlands a dozen times, Switzerland, various places, Israel, to try to look at this problem in a worldwide fashion. But my case study, and here are the people I interviewed, these 30 prisoners. I was basically looking at leaders. I didn't want low-hanging fruit, right? I wanted the shot callers, the guy who ran these programs. and they come out of Nation of Islam. They came out of Sunni, sects, various religions, white supremacy faiths. And there's where I conducted my research, those three prisons. Basically, that's where I got the core 30 inmates. I did the interviews alone, no guard present, no tape recorder, just myself and a convict in the chapel. And they were 90 minutes. Some guys asked for 2. Some guys asked for 3 and then sent more letters. They kind of had a lot to talk about. So it wasn't hard. What was hard was getting the IRB passed through Indiana State's IRB commission and doing all the online paperwork. That was torturous. Doing the actual work was very easy, and it was easy and exciting. So this is where I did it. Folsom Prison, built in 1875. You've heard of Folsom Prison? California's Folsom Prison, famous Folsom Prison. It's not what you call a correctional institution or correctional facility. It's a big house. It's a penitentiary. It's an old time. You know where penitentiary comes from, right? It's a house of penitence where one goes to mend your soul. And that was the whole purpose of this. There is the iconic front gate. And this is what you see when you first drive into the place. And this is what it looked like on a morning in 1969. How many of you know who this guy is? All right, a third. Johnny Cash, who recorded his most famous record live at Folsom Prison there on this morning, right after he was photographed here. His biographer said, "Johnny, how you feeling?" He says, "I'm scared shitless." Right? Going into this prison, created some of the greatest music of his life. Johnny Cash was a prison reformer, par excellence. I was known as a prison reformer in my little section of Arizona. Paid for it, learned from it, but have studied prison reformers in my career. I think the most of them. And nobody Johnny Cash was the best of them all. Here he is sitting with the President of the United States, discussing prison rape, discussing injustices behind walls. Now, just imagine, flash forward. Imagine Donald Trump and Chance the Rapper sitting down discussing prison conditions. That's an analogy. That is truly an analogy of what this represents. We lost this. When we lost reformers, prisons went to hell. These are, you've seen the figures if you're a criminology student. The United States leads the world in prison populations. We are the nation's biggest jailer. We incarcerate more inmates than China. Any other country in the world, we are the biggest jailer. Do we have the highest rates of crime? No. Not overall. Gun violence, yeah. Right? Some drugs, yes. But not overall crime. Here is a chart showing when that trend began. As you can see, things start to go north in about 1990. You know, in my classes, I explained the period before 1990 is BC, before crack, right? And AC is after crack, right? Because with the crack came the drug crews and gangs, and the deterioration of the American inner city, and the ghettoization of prisons. and the prisonization of ghettos. This is a huge transformation that occurs in the United States. Had a profound effect on prisons that we are seeing to this day. There's, what's that? That's California. No prison system in the world has ever grown at the rate California has grown out. Anybody know the reason why? There is a reason for that spike. There are 3 or 4 reasons. I bet somebody can mention them. Mention one of them. What is it? Drugs? Yep. Mandatory minimum sentences for drug possession, particularly around powdered cocaine. Right? This has been the big issue. And who gets most often? Rock cocaine. Right? You know, the studies on this show that whites are more often to use powder cocaine. Blacks are more often to be found in possession of rock cocaine. The penalties for rock cocaine are higher, so you find, therefore, a disproportionate number of blacks incarcerated. What else? 3 famous words that are uttered by Bill Clinton. 3 strikes and you are out. Right? 3-strike legislation has led to this increase. Truth in sentencing. Mandatory minimum sentencing. You can boil it down into words. Get tough policies enacted by the California legislature. I have less to blame the leaders, Conan the Barbarian, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was the governor there, and certainly the most recent one who's done a lot to turn that around is Jerry Brown. He has done a lot to assuage the problems I'm going to show here next. So here's what you look like. If you spend a week going to Folsom Prison and this even worse place located right next door called New Folsom Prison, students of Orwell would have a field day with that one. These statistics. Severely overcrowded. 2/3 are African American. 70% read like the second grade level. They are double and triple bunked in dorms or in what's called bad beds, hallways. Imagine a hallway out here. Walking through a hallway, it's full of convicts sleeping 3 in a bunk. That's what these prisons look like. 20 serious assaults per week, and when they say serious assaults in a prison, that usually means somebody's been cut, shot with a zip gun, or doused with gasoline and set on fire. This is what we mean by serious assaults in a prison. Anytime you increase overcrowding, you increase this level of rapacious violence. More than half have HIV or hepatitis C. Let me explain what this means. If you walk the hallways, if you walk the yard at Folsom Prison, every second guy you see has yellow eyes. Their livers are failing. California's prison system is so broke it cannot treat an hepatitis C inmate until his liver fails. That is to say, until he's dying. It is a failed prison system. It used to be a great prison system. Back in Johnny Cash's day, none of this happened. Every inmate had their own bunk. They had rehabilitation programs, treatment programs. They had jobs. All of that has been amputated by mismanagement, and now we have this failed prison system. 70% recidivism rate. In case those of you who don't know from outside of criminology what recidivism is, it's a failure rate. Imagine ISU having a 70% failure rate. 70% of you come in here to take these, 70% fail. You'd call this institution a failed institution. The same you can say of Folsom Prison. It is a failed prison. It's like failed states. They produce terrorism. Okay, so let me wind it up. You want to work in prison? Where are the 2 or 3 of you kind souls? Get ready. Right? This is what you... If you don't have the courage to walk up to a group like this and say, move along, get busy, do something with your life, right? Right, Glenn? If you don't have the courage to do that, go into insurance. Right? Go to real estate. Those are fine occupations, but don't go into prisons, because this is what you deal with. This is what you deal with in prisons. Look at the overcrowding. Totally lifeless. Totally, they say, idleness is the devil's handmaiden. These people are totally isolated or not expected to do anything. They don't have jobs. They don't have books to read. They don't have any sort of humane treatment. No counseling. No medical care. So what do you expect them to do? They get angry at the system. They begin to hear stories in various esoteric religions, folk tales about revolution and about changing the system from within. That's the way you develop the social psychological foundation for terrorism emanating from prison. MS-13. If you don't have the courage to walk up to MS-13 and sit down with them, sit down with one of these guys and ask him about his life, don't work in prisons, because this is what prisons look like today. Failed prisons. This is a guy I interviewed, member of the Nazi lowriders. If you notice, his nose is busted from a fist fight. His eyes are ulcerated from the combined effects of hepatitis C and meth. That is a swastika tattoo around his neck. This is the type of person who looks for a religion in prison. He's a Wiccan. These guys celebrate birds and winds. And this is the type of guy who would convert to a religion in prison, and this religion may have some sort of violent undertone. So the real reason I was sent out there to California was to take a look at this guy, Kevin James, who is right now over here in Terre Haute in the segregated unit. Nobody can get to him. Kevin James from New Folsom Prison used a cell phone walking the yard at New Folsom Prison to dial his homeboys in South Central Los Angeles, and they orchestrated a terrorist attack on Los Angeles International Airport. A guy in maximum security prison with a cell phone organizes the terrorist plot. So I was sent there to interview the existing members of his group, JIS, and really it boiled down to one thing. It boiled down to charisma. This James, the short guy, cornrows in his hair, has a prayer mark, a zebeda or a raisin in the middle of the sign of a devout Muslim. And it was this charisma that drew followers to James. He had a group about 20 strong. So he had 20 inmates who formed a terrorist cell in a prison cell. This was the case that excited the Justice Department the most, and the reason for that research, and eventually the reason for this talk. Let me go quick around here, and we'll be done. Most conversions in prison or changes in one's religious orientation happen through friendship and kinship networks, cellmates, family, friends. Go back, read the story of Malcolm X. How did Malcolm X convert to the Nation of Islam? His brother, right? It wasn't somebody at the mosque. It was his brother, Reginald. Primary searching, the primary motive is spiritual searching. I mean, I met one guy who went through 8 different religions in 1 year, jumping, searching, just searching for some sense of meaning and identity. Radical inmates are radicalized by other radical inmates. In other words, I found no evidence somebody coming from the outside radicalizing these people, though they were radicalized inside. And organizationally, radicalization happens on a prison gang model. So I'll stop there. I would hope that there is a question out there that can generate some discussion, and I appreciate your time.